There was something magical about the 1970s, wasn't there? The flashing lights of disco, the pulse of ABBA's infectious melodies echoing through stadiums, the world watching as four Swedish musicians ascended to pop royalty. Benny Andersson and Anni-Frid Lyngstad were at the center of it all. Their music, their love, everything seemed so perfect. But behind the sequins, the harmonies, and those picture-perfect smiles, there was something brewing, something much darker than anyone ever suspected. For years, we all believed that ABBA's breakup was just a casualty of time, shifting trends and personal differences. But then Benny broke his silence, revealing something that shook the foundation of everything we thought we knew. Behind the glamorous facade, there was a story that no one had heard before, a story of a love that turned turbulent, a friendship that crumbled, and conflicts that were far more destructive than we ever realized. It wasn't just about Benny and Frida. Their split was just one piece of a much bigger puzzle, a puzzle that involved betrayal, hurt, and a series of clashes that painted a picture much darker than the shimmering pop empire ABBA created. But the heart of it all, that was Benny and Frida's relationship. They weren't just bandmates. They were a power couple, and their love story seemed like something out of a fairy tale. But fairy tales don't always have happy endings, do they? When they first met in the late 1960s, Frida was this fiery, independent woman, determined to carve out her place in the music world. Benny, the genius behind ABBA's sound, saw her for the star she was. Together they built something monumental. Their partnership was built on a shared vision, a dream of music and success. But as the fame grew, so did the cracks. Benny's calm, methodical approach to music began to clash with Frida's passionate, emotional nature. She wanted to feel, to express, to live in the moment. He wanted control, structure, and precision. The tension that simmered beneath their creative differences began to seep into their personal lives, and by the early 1970s it was clear something was breaking. Then came the rumors. Benny's infidelity, at first whispers, then the truth. Frida felt humiliated, devastated, betrayed not just as a wife, but as an artist who had poured herself into ABBA, giving everything she had to the music. Their world came crashing down. The love they'd built, the empire they had created, it all unraveled in the most painful way imaginable. By 1981, it was over. But even after ABBA's split, the wounds didn't heal. Frida and Benny's resentment lingered. She saw him as cold, detached from a man who had tossed aside their love the moment he was done with it. He saw her as an unpredictable, emotional storm he couldn't control. And neither of them ever truly moved on, but that wasn't the end of the story, oh no. You've probably heard the rumors about the rivalry between Frida and Agnetha. Two beautiful women, one band, the tension, the competition for the spotlight. For years, the tabloids and fans speculated, feeding the fire of a silent war between the two women. At first, they denied it. They called each other friends, sisters, and partners in song. But the truth? It was more complicated than that. Frida, with her dark, dramatic presence, her husky voice, her ability to command the stage, often felt overshadowed by Agnetha's ethereal beauty and her soaring, angelic vocals. While Agnetha was ABBA's golden girl, Frida was often seen as the second voice, the supporting act, the one who had to fight for recognition. Those unspoken tensions, they festered in the studio, on tour, even in interviews. Who would sing lead? Who would be front and center on the album covers? Slowly, quietly, these questions created a divide. There's a side to ABBA we never saw, a side that was messy, complicated, and painful. But isn't that what makes their story so relatable? Beneath the glitz and glam of pop superstardom, they were human. Just like all of us. They loved, they fought, they struggled. They were real. And in that realness, they became something far more powerful than any chart-topping hit. They became a reflection of our own dreams, our own heartbreaks, our own messy lives. Maybe that's why we keep coming back to them. Not because of the music, but because of the story. By the time ABBA dissolved, the fractures between Frida and Agnetha had deepened. They had grown distant, barely speaking. While the world believed their split was amicable, those close to them knew better. Behind the glamour and fame, Frida's life had been far from a fairy tale or a pop anthem. In reality, she was haunted by shadows, betrayal, grief, and scars the world never saw. Imagine for a moment a newborn child, innocent, unaware but already branded an outcast. That was Frida Lyngstad. Born in 1945, at the tail end of World War II, she entered the world during one of the most painful chapters in history. Norway was struggling to heal from the trauma of Nazi occupation, and Frida's mother, Anni Lyngstad, had fallen in love with a German soldier, Alfred Hasse. When the war ended, women who had relationships with German officers were vilified, shunned, and seen as traitors. And their children, like Frida, were cast aside, seen as Tyskabarn, or German children, marked as stains on the purity of Norwegian blood. Frida never even had the chance to know her father. She grew up believing he had died in battle, and her mother, seeking a fresh start away from the shame and humiliation, fled to Sweden. But no matter where they went, the scars of rejection followed. Picture this: growing up in a country that viewed your very existence as a mistake, a child whose very life was considered a crime, and whose birthplace had disowned her. Even Sweden, which gave her a safe haven, couldn't erase the trauma of being a girl without a true homeland, without a father, and most painfully, without a place to belong. Years later, Frida would learn the truth. Her father had survived. He was alive, living a life far removed from her own. And when they finally met, after all those years, the reunion was nothing like a fairy tale. It was awkward, distant, forced. There were no joyful embraces, no heartfelt moments of closure, only unanswered questions. Frida had longed for this reunion her entire life, but when it came, it was empty. That abandonment she had felt as a child lingered. It never truly left her. It shaped her relationships, her music, her identity. She was always searching for something: love, stability, a place to belong, but never quite finding it. For years, Frida had been cast as ABBA's fierce, independent warrior, the woman with the fiery red hair, the sultry voice that could command a room. But behind closed doors, even she wasn't immune to the contradictions that love and life often bring. After the heartache of her breakup with Benny, Frida sought something new, something different. She longed for a new identity. And in 1992, she found it. She married Prince Heinrich Russo of Plauen, a German aristocrat. To the public, it looked like a fairy tale come true. The ABBA queen had become a real-life princess, living in a Swiss castle far from the glare of the music industry. But like all fairy tales, the illusion masked a far darker truth. The marriage, though filled with wealth and status, was far from perfect. Prince Heinrich was powerful, respected, and deeply influential, but he was also controlling. Frida, who had spent her entire life fighting for independence, for her voice, for freedom, suddenly found herself suffocated by the very things she had spent her life running from: rigid expectations, traditions, and the silence that came with being under the thumb of someone else's power. It was as if the patterns of her past were repeating. She had spent her childhood fighting for a sense of self-worth, and now she was once again struggling to maintain her voice, to hold on to the freedom she had fought so hard to build. For Frida, the fairy tale was not the freedom she had imagined. It was another cage: obedience. It was the very thing Frida had spent her entire life escaping. The control, the silencing of her voice. These were the chains she had longed to break free from. But in the end, it all came back to her in a different form. She had spent her years searching for stability, for a sense of belonging, but she had traded one cage for another. And as she tried to convince the world that she had finally found happiness, whispers swirled around her, a woman torn between love and self-preservation. And then, just as she was beginning to find her footing in this unfamiliar world, tragedy struck. Fame, fortune, love, none of it could prepare a mother for the unimaginable loss of her child. In 1998, Frida's worst nightmare became a reality. Her beloved daughter, Anne-Lise Lott, was killed in a devastating car accident. The pain was unbearable. It suffocated her, relentlessly pulling her deeper into a grief she couldn't escape. Anne-Lise had been Frida's anchor, her reason to keep going after all the chaos of ABBA, after the heartbreak with Benny, after everything. And now, just like that, she is gone. Frida shut herself off from the world. She retreated into the shadows, pulling away from the people who cared for her, disappearing from public life. She had already lost so much of her home, her marriage, her sense of self, and now, she had lost the one person who truly understood her. The bold, fiery woman who once commanded the stage with unshakable confidence faded away. She no longer wanted to sing. She no longer wanted to be seen. She no longer wanted to exist in a world that had taken everything from her. For years, she lived in near-complete isolation, grieving not just for her daughter, but for the life she had never truly been able to hold on to. The world remembers Frida Lyngstad as an icon, a legend, the woman who stood at the pinnacle of pop music with ABBA. But her real story, the one that few ever saw, was a story of struggle, of loss, of endless battles fought behind the curtains. She was born into rejection, fought her way into fame, but lost almost everything along the way. She had been abandoned, betrayed, controlled, and broken. And yet, she endured. Even in her pain, even in the silence, the echoes of her voice remained. The world may have taken so much from her, but the music she left behind was hers forever. For decades, fans saw Frida as the bold, fierce, unstoppable performer, the woman who stood beside ABBA's greatest hits, radiating energy. But behind that image was a woman who fought battles no one truly understood. Her clashes with Benny, her tensions with Agnetha, her personal tragedies all painted a portrait of someone who lived a life filled with as much heartbreak as success. Now, with Benny Andersson finally breaking his silence, the world is left to re-examine Frida's story. Was she the victim of circumstance, or a woman whose fiery nature led to her own undoing? Was she misunderstood, or just as responsible for the conflicts that surrounded her? One thing is certain, the legend of ABBA will never look the same again. Frida's story is no longer just a footnote in ABBA's legacy. It is a raw, painful reminder of the complexities of human experience, the quiet battles fought in the shadows, the pain that no amount of fame can heal, and the strength it takes to keep going when everything seems lost. And though the world may never truly understand her, her music will continue to speak louder than any words ever could.